That evening, the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. I made my way to Tom's house, my mind racing with a blend of excitement and uncertainty. It felt wrong, and yet so enticing, the way the unspoken tension between us had been building since that fateful night over wine. As I reached his front door, my fingers hovered over the doorbell for a moment, hesitating. I knew what was at stake. I knew that once I stepped inside, the boundaries that had kept us on the edge of temptation would be harder to maintain. But then, with a deep breath, I rang the bell, and within seconds, Tom answered. He stood there in a casual t-shirt and jeans, his smile disarming. His presence felt warm and inviting, as though this was just another friendly visit, though we both knew otherwise. "Hey, come in," he said, stepping aside to let me in. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and I could see his laptop open on the kitchen counter, design files scattered across the screen. "Thanks for helping me out," he added, his tone light, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed the casualness of his words. I smiled, nodding, and made my way to the counter. "Of course. I'm happy to help," I replied, though my voice sounded a little too breathy, too eager. I sat down next to him, pulling out my own laptop, ready to discuss the project, or at least pretending to. For a while, we worked in silence, exchanging ideas, focusing on the design, but the air was thick with tension. I could feel his gaze lingering on me when he thought I wasn't looking, and every time our hands accidentally brushed as we reached for the mouse or clicked through the files, a spark shot through me. It was becoming harder to concentrate on the task at hand. After what felt like an eternity, Tom leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms above his head, breaking the silence. "You know," he said, his voice suddenly deeper, softer, "I'm really glad we've had a chance to spend time together like this. I haven't felt this, connected to someone in a long time." His words hung in the air, and I felt my pulse quicken. I should have deflected, laughed it off, changed the subject, but instead I found myself meeting his gaze, the intensity in his eyes making it impossible to look away. "I feel the same," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. My heart raced as I said the words, a mixture of fear and excitement flooding through me. It was as if admitting it out loud broke the dam, and suddenly, there was no going back. Tom stood and slowly moved closer, until he was standing right in front of me. My breath caught in my throat, and before I could say anything more, he reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering longer than they should have. His touch was warm, and every fiber of my being responded to it, despite the alarm bells going off in the back of my mind. "Anna," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, as if saying my name out loud was something dangerous. "I've been thinking about you, about us. This connection we have, it's real, isn't it?" His words sent a thrill through me, but I could feel the weight of what was happening crashing down around us. My son, his son, our families, they were all part of this tangled mess that we were about to create. And yet, in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. All I could focus on was the way his hand now rested on my arm, the heat of his touch spreading through me like wildfire. "I don't know if we should do this," I whispered. Though the conviction in my voice was weak, a hollow attempt at holding onto the boundaries we had already blurred. Our kids, what if they find out? He didn't answer right away. Instead, his thumb traced soft circles on my skin, his touch sending shivers down my spine. "We'll be careful," he said finally, his voice steady, confident. "We're adults, Anna. We can handle this." And with those words, the last of my resistance crumbled. The rational part of me, the mother, the responsible woman who had kept her emotions in check for so long, faded away. All that was left was the feeling of Tom's presence, the undeniable pull between us. Before I knew it, we were kissing, his lips soft but insistent against mine, as if this moment had been inevitable from the start. It felt like time had stopped, and for a brief moment, the world outside didn't exist. It was just us, tangled in something we couldn't control, something we didn't want to control. But then, as quickly as it had begun, reality came crashing back. I pulled away, my heart pounding, my mind spinning. This was wrong. So wrong. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "I should go," I said, my voice shaking as I stood up abruptly, grabbing my things. My mind was racing, guilt gnawing at the edges of the euphoria that had consumed me just moments before. I can't do this. Tom stood too, his expression unreadable, but he didn't try to stop me. I understand, he said quietly, though the look in his eyes told me that this wasn't over. I left his house that night, my thoughts in turmoil. As I walked home, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. My heart ached with both desire and guilt, and I knew that things between Tom and me had changed forever. The question was, where would we go from here? The next few days passed in a blur. I avoided Tom, kept my distance during our son's playdates, but the memory of that night lingered, always at the forefront of my mind. I had stepped into dangerous territory, and now there was no escaping the consequences that awaited. That evening I arrived at Tom's house, knowing full well the pretense that this project had become. We were no longer just working together. Every shared glance, every accidental touch was electric, awakening something within me that I hadn't felt in years. It was a desire I had buried deep beneath the layers of my role as a mother, a provider, and a woman trying to do the right thing. Yet here I was, in Tom's house, under the dimming light of a setting sun, feeling the gravity between us grow heavier with every passing second. As we worked side by side, our hands brushed against each other more often than they should have, lingering just a bit longer than necessary. My heart pounded each time, and I could feel my breath catch in my throat. I glanced at Tom, catching him in those moments where he thought I wasn't looking. His jaw tightened, his eyes held a question, one he hadn't dared to ask yet. The sun had nearly disappeared below the horizon, casting a deep purple hue across the sky when the sharp ring of my phone cut through the tension. It was Paul, my son, calling to tell me he'd be home earlier than expected. In that moment, the spell was broken. The real world, with all its obligations and responsibilities, came crashing back in. I could hear Tom sigh softly beside me, and when I looked at him, there was a shared understanding between us. We both knew what we had been dancing around, and we both knew the impossibility of it. "Maybe this is a bad idea," I said, offering a small, nervous laugh to lighten the weight of the air between us. Tom smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe, he echoed, "but it feels complicated, doesn't it?" I nodded, unable to find the right words. He was right, it was complicated. What was between us wasn't just an innocent attraction. It was deeper, more dangerous. It was a longing for connection, a desire to break free from the mundane lives we had settled into, and yet we both knew the cost. There were children, families, lives that would be upended if we crossed that line. Just then, Paul arrived, bursting through the door with the careless energy of youth. His presence shifted the atmosphere, and I put on my well-practiced motherly mask. Yet, beneath the surface, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed, that the delicate balance of my life was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't control. The following days were a blur of routine and tension. I went through the motions, working, cooking, mothering, but my mind was always on Tom. Each time I saw him, whether it was a wave across the street or a casual conversation in passing, the undercurrent of desire pulled at me. It was like a current, slow and steady, eroding my resolve. Then, one quiet Saturday afternoon, with Paul out at the movies with friends, I found myself at Tom's house again. This time, the pretense of a project felt even flimsier than before. The moment I stepped inside, I knew why I was really there, and so did Tom. He was waiting for me, his casual smile making my heart race faster than it should. We started working, but the tension was palpable. It was different this time, charged, more intense, as if we both knew this might be the moment we stopped pretending. Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we weren't just neighbors? Tom's voice was low, serious, pulling me from my thoughts. I froze for a second, feeling my heart skip a beat. I think about it more than I should, I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Tom stepped closer, and for a moment it felt like the world outside had disappeared. His proximity sent a wave of heat through me, and when our eyes met, I saw the same yearning I felt mirrored in his gaze. It was as if all the unspoken words, all the lingering touches, had led us to this inevitable moment. But then, like a lifeline, reality snapped back into focus. I thought of Paul, his smile, his future. I thought of what it would mean if I let this happen, how it could change everything. The risk was too great, too dangerous. "Tom, we can't," I whispered, my voice shaky, even though every fiber of my being wanted to say yes. "Why not?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. "We're adults. We deserve to explore this, to see where it goes." His words tugged at my heart, tempting me to give in. I wanted to. God, how I wanted to. But I couldn't shake the image of my son, of the life I had built, the life I was responsible for protecting. This, whatever was between Tom and me, was too uncertain, too risky. I can't," I said, taking a step back, the space between us suddenly feeling like an insurmountable distance. Tom's face fell, disappointment washing over his features. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the same conflict that was tearing me apart inside. But in the end, we both knew there was no other choice. He nodded, understanding, though the air between us remained thick with the weight of everything left unsaid. We returned to our project, but it was different now. The spark, the unfulfilled longing, hung heavy in the room. Every glance, every brush of our hands, was a reminder of the line we had chosen not to cross. But the desire remained, simmering just below the surface, waiting for another moment, another chance. And as I left his house that evening, the memory of Tom's closeness still tingling on my skin, I knew that this wasn't over. The tension, the pull, it wasn't something that could be easily forgotten. It would linger, always there, just beneath the surface, tempting us both to see how far we were willing to go. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to distance myself from Tom, but it was as if the universe had other plans. No matter how hard I fought it, our paths kept crossing in ways that felt impossible to ignore. Every glance, every fleeting touch, only deepened the magnetic pull between us. I kept telling myself to resist, to focus on my responsibilities, but the connection between us only seemed to grow stronger with each encounter. Then, one evening, everything shifted. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner when Paul burst through the front door, his face glowing with excitement. "Mom, you won't believe it. Noah invited me to a party this weekend," he announced, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. My stomach dropped. I had heard about this party held at a local park and attended by many of the neighborhood kids, including Tom's son. The thought of Tom being there, in the same space as me, sent a thrill through me that I wasn't prepared for. "That sounds fun," I replied, forcing a smile even as my mind raced. I felt a wave of nervous energy pulse through me. Tom would be there, and I wasn't sure how I would handle it. My feelings for him were growing stronger, despite every rational thought that warned me to keep my distance. As the weekend approached, I found myself increasingly distracted. On the one hand, I wanted Paul to enjoy his freedom, to have fun with his friends, but on the other hand, I couldn't shake the fear of what might happen between Tom and me if we were alone. It felt like walking a tightrope, trying to balance my maternal instincts with my own growing desires. The night of the party arrived, and after a brief talk with Paul about curfews and safety, I watched him leave with a mix of pride and anxiety. The hours dragged on, and the silence of the house seemed louder than usual. My mind wandered, replaying every recent interaction I'd had with Tom. I wondered if he would be at the party, if he was thinking about me too. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tom. "Paul is having a blast. Hope he's not keeping you up." A smile tugged at my lips as I read the message. I typed back quickly, glad to hear it. "Enjoy the night." A minute later, another buzz. "Want to come over for a nightcap? I could use some adult conversation." My heart skipped a beat. The temptation was immediate and overwhelming. My fingers hovered over the screen, hesitating. I knew that going to his house, especially at this hour, could lead us to a place we might not be ready for. But the alternative, staying alone, isolated, felt unbearable. After a long pause, I typed, "I'll be right over," my hands trembling with anticipation. When I arrived, Tom's house was warmly lit, the soft glow from the lamps casting a cozy atmosphere. He greeted me with a smile, and for a moment everything else faded away. We settled onto the couch with glasses of wine in hand, the conversation flowing naturally. It felt easy, like we had known each other for years. We laughed about our kids, shared stories from our pasts, and as the hours ticked by, I felt a closeness I hadn't experienced in years. But with every passing minute, the air between us thickened. There was a palpable tension, a current of unspoken desire that neither of us seemed able to address head-on. The space between us grew smaller, our bodies inching closer as the conversation became more intimate. Then, just as I felt we were on the verge of crossing a line, a sudden thought snapped me back to reality. I could hear Paul's laughter in my mind, reminding me of my responsibilities. The weight of my role as a mother came crashing down, grounding me before the moment spiraled out of control. I glanced at the clock. It was later than I had realized. Too late for Paul to still be out. I should probably check on Paul, I said, my voice wavering as I stood up, trying to steady myself. Tom nodded, though his expression was difficult to read. Of course, he said, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, he reached out, gently grasping my hand. His touch was warm, sending a jolt of electricity through me. "Anna," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. "I don't want to complicate things, but I can't ignore how I feel. There's something between us. I know you feel it too." My heart raced at his words, and for a split second, I considered what it would be like to give in. But then, like a wave, the reality of our situation came rushing back. Our kids, our families, this wasn't just about us. "Tom," I whispered, pulling my hand away, "we have to think about our kids. This isn't just about us." He sighed, releasing my hand as he took a step back, the weight of the situation settling over us like a heavy fog. "I know," he said quietly, "but it's hard to ignore what's right in front of us." I left his house that night with a storm of emotions swirling inside me. As I walked back home, I felt torn between the life I had built for my son and the deepening connection I felt with Tom. The night was cool, but I barely noticed. The weight of what had almost happened hung over me, and I knew that whatever was unfolding between Tom and me wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The next few days passed in a haze of conflicting emotions. I couldn't shake the tension from my encounter with Tom. His words replayed in my mind, echoing with a mixture of excitement and guilt. Every stolen glance, every shared whisper felt heavy with unspoken meaning, and I found myself oscillating between the thrill of what could be and the fear of what it could cost. Paul, blissfully unaware of my internal struggle, filled our home with laughter and stories from the party. He talked about his friends, about Noah, and I nodded along, trying to be present. But every time I thought I had my emotions under control, Tom would drift into my thoughts, and I'd find myself wondering what would happen next. My heart was tangled in a web of feelings I didn't know how to untangle. The following weekend, Paul asked if he could invite Noah over for a movie night. I agreed, knowing full well it meant Tom would be stopping by. A knot of anticipation formed in my stomach, a mix of dread and hope that I couldn't quite push away. When the boys arrived, the house filled with their energy, the glow of the TV flickering as their laughter echoed down the hallway. For a moment I allowed myself to relax into the warmth of it all. But then Tom walked in, and everything shifted. His smile sent a familiar flutter through me, and despite my attempts to push aside my feelings, the air between us grew thick with unspoken tension. As we settled into the living room, I could feel the weight of his presence beside me, the thread between us tightening with each passing minute. The boys were oblivious, caught up in their movie, but Tom's gaze found mine again and again, filled with meaning I couldn't ignore. "Can we talk?" he whispered, leaning in close enough for his breath to graze my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. "Now," I whispered back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Just for a minute," he urged, his voice soft but insistent. I hesitated but nodded, a surge of adrenaline racing through me. I stood, quietly leading him to the kitchen, where the noise of the movie became a distant hum behind us. As soon as the door clicked shut, the weight of our unspoken words descended on the room. I could feel it pressing in on us, making the air thick and charged with possibility. "Anna," I can't stop thinking about you, Tom began, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to keep sneaking around like this. His admission sent a thrill through me, but with it came a wave of anxiety. My heart beat faster, torn between desire and the fear of what was at stake. Tom, we have to consider our kids, I said, my voice shaky as I tried to steady myself. This could change everything. He stepped closer, frustration mingling with the heat of his desire. I know, but I can't pretend like this isn't real. There's something between us, Anna. You feel it too, don't you? I swallowed hard, my mind racing with the implications. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to see where this could go, he replied, his gaze locked on mine as he closed the distance between us. The warmth of his body so close to mine was intoxicating. But I need to know if you feel the same. For a moment, everything else faded away. I was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, staring into the potential of what could be. Part of me wanted to jump, to throw caution to the wind and embrace the possibilities. But another part of me screamed for caution, for reason, for responsibility. I was a mother first, and the thought of what this could mean for Paul weighed heavily on my mind. I want to, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. But what if we hurt our boys? What if this blows up in our faces? Tom's jaw tightened with frustration, though his eyes softened with understanding. I get it, he said, running a hand through his hair. But if we keep ignoring this, we might miss out on something amazing. We're adults, we can handle it. I could feel the pull of his words, the temptation to let go of everything that had held me back for so long. But the voice of reason was louder now, reminding me of the responsibilities I had, of the consequences I couldn't afford to ignore. We need to think about them first, I said, my voice firm but gentle. I can't rush into something without considering the impact it could have on Paul. I'm sorry, Tom. He sighed, the disappointment clear in his eyes, but there was also a hint of resignation. I respect that, Anna, he said quietly. I really do, but just know I'm here and I'm willing to wait. His words hung in the air between us as we returned to the living room. The boys were laughing, their world untouched by the turmoil that churned beneath the surface of mine. I sat back down, but I couldn't focus on the movie, the weight of my conversation with Tom replaying over and over in my mind. As the credits rolled and the night came to an end, I felt a heaviness settle over me. This was only the beginning. The connection between Tom and me wasn't something I could ignore forever, no matter how hard I tried. The line we danced around felt fragile, and I knew that sooner or later, we would have to confront it head-on. But for now, I would wait. Wait for the right moment, wait for clarity, wait for the courage to decide whether to leap or let go. The next few days after my conversation with Tom were filled with an undercurrent of emotion I couldn't shake. I kept replaying his words in my head, wondering if we had crossed a line, or if we were still just tiptoeing on the edge. My heart raced with excitement at the thought of what could be, but at the same time, guilt gnawed at me, reminding me of the complexity of the situation. I had to consider Paul, his life, his future, and the potential fallout of anything between Tom and me. Paul, meanwhile, was as carefree as ever. He came home from Noah's party with laughter and stories, filling the house with his usual energy. But while I smiled and nodded along, my mind kept drifting back to Tom, to his lingering glances and the quiet moments we shared. It felt like a whirlwind, and I couldn't quite catch my breath. A week later, Paul asked if he could have Noah over for a movie night. The casualness of his request hit me, of course. This meant Tom would come too. My stomach flipped at the thought. I agreed, knowing I couldn't avoid Tom forever. The anticipation of seeing him again gnawed at me, and I found myself obsessing over what to wear, how to act. Should I keep my distance? Should I let the connection between us grow, even though the risks loomed large? When Tom and Noah arrived that evening, the house quickly filled with the boys' laughter and the sound of the movie. Yet, amid all the noise, I was keenly aware of Tom's presence. He greeted me with a simple smile that sent my heart racing, and I found myself drawn to the easy way he carried himself, the warmth he exuded. Every glance he cast in my direction felt like a silent conversation, one charged with meaning. As the movie played, Tom leaned in close. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with intent. I nodded, my pulse quickening. "Sure," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We moved quietly to the kitchen, closing the door behind us to muffle the noise from the living room. The air between us was thick with the weight of unspoken words. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that this conversation could change everything. "I've been thinking about you," Tom started, his eyes locked onto mine. "I don't want to keep pretending this isn't real. I don't want to sneak around anymore." His words sent a thrill through me, but they also made me uneasy. The reality of the situation hit hard. I wasn't just a woman exploring her feelings. I was a mother, and I had to think about Paul. "Tom, we can't do this," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "We have to think about our kids. If they find out, it could change everything." Tom stepped closer, his face softening but filled with resolve. "I know it's complicated," he admitted, "but we're both good parents. I think we can handle this. I don't want to ignore what's between us." His proximity, his sincerity, made it hard to resist. I felt the warmth of his body so close to mine, and part of me wanted to give in, to allow myself to explore what we had. But another part of me, the part that was a mother first, screamed for caution. "I can't just dive into this," I whispered, feeling the weight of my responsibilities settling on my shoulders. "We need to take it slow. I don't want to put Paul in a difficult position." Tom nodded, though I could see the disappointment flicker across his face. "Of course. I understand," he said softly. "We can take it slow. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm willing to wait." We stood there for a moment longer, the air between us thick with unresolved tension. But I knew I had made the right decision, at least for now. We were both parents, and the last thing I wanted was to hurt our boys or complicate their lives with our emotions. When we returned to the living room, the boys were still engrossed in their movie, oblivious to the turmoil playing out between us. I tried to focus on the film, but my mind kept drifting back to Tom, his words, his nearness, the undeniable connection between us. Over the following weeks, Tom and I found ourselves carving out small moments together: coffee dates, walks through the neighborhood, quiet conversations while our boys played. It was gradual, slow, but it felt right. We were mindful of our sons, careful not to rush into anything that could disrupt their world. One afternoon, Paul noticed my lighter mood. "Mom, you seem really happy lately," he said with a grin. I smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I'm just trying to find balance, sweetheart," I said, realizing that for the first time in a long while I was rediscovering joy, and it felt liberating. As summer faded into fall, Tom and I continued to build a friendship that felt solid and real. The boys grew closer, and their bond only strengthened as the months passed. It was a delicate dance, but one that brought a sense of peace to my life. I knew that whatever happened between Tom and me, we would handle it with care, always keeping our sons at the forefront of our decisions. One evening, as I tucked Paul into bed, he looked up at me with his wide, innocent eyes. "Mom, I'm glad you're happy. You deserve someone special," he said softly. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes at his words, filled with a wisdom beyond his years. "Thank you, Paul," I whispered, kissing his forehead. As I closed his door that night, I knew I was ready to face whatever the future held with Tom. We would take it one step at a time, guided by our love for our boys and our desire to find happiness amidst the complexities of life. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful that love, despite its challenges, could blossom in the most unexpected places.